Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week, I've been expecting you, Dib, because I'm discussing Invader ZIM, Enter the Florpus. And I've been so excited for this movie ever since it was first announced back in April 2017 that Invader ZIM was coming back with a new movie. And I kid you not, shortly after Hey Arnold the Jungle movie aired, my subconscious just shifted its excitement to this new Invader ZIM movie. And I actually had a dream that I was for some reason back in high school and everyone was cramming for these statewide standardized tests and the subject was Invader ZIM. And I was just standing there like, oh, I know the show so well, I didn't even have to study. And so then, over the past couple years, every once in a while, I would have a dream involving Invader ZIM. And another one was actually with the creator of the show, Jhonen Vasquez, and Ricky Simons, who voices Gurr. And the two of them were just in this dark recording studio talking. And Jhonen was saying how he's going to purposely give fake details about the movie so that it would throw people off, so that they would be surprised when they actually watched it. And all I remember was him saying, so then Dib wanders into the forest and he comes across a decapitated Gurr. And another one I had was actually of Dib in his lab, and then this woman shows up, and she's kind of like a grown female Dib, and she introduces herself as Jek, and she says that it's short for Jessica, because her name was supposed to be Jessica, but it was misspelled on her birth certificate. I kid you not. And I guess that was my subconscious coming up with possibly Dib and Gaz's mom, but if anything, she kind of just seems like a grown female Dib, so maybe an older sibling, but I don't know. And another one actually was Zim trying to recruit Gaz to join him in enslaving the human race. So then at one point he decides, oh, well, humans don't like doing their chores, so then he's going to mow the lawn. So then you see him mowing the lawn, and then Gaz looks out the window and she says, he's not even mowing our lawn. So those were a few of my sporadic Invader ZIM dreams I've had over the past couple years waiting for this movie. And truthfully, I'm genuinely amazed at how much this show and these characters have invaded my psyche. And please excuse that horrific pun, but it's true. And this movie, oh my gosh, so hilarious. Such absolutely gorgeous animation. I loved it start to finish. Wow. It was written by Jhonen Vasquez. The art director is Jenny Goldberg. Storyboard director is Jake Wyatt. The editor is Jonathan Sims. The composer is Kevin Manthe, who also is the composer for the series. And the art style is updated and more in line with the art style of the comics. Even though actually in the comics, they experiment with different art styles with different artists, but in those first two comics in particular. And really the first 10 minutes or so of this movie, it's a retelling of the first issue of the comic. But first off, with that opening shot of just that different art style of Dib and how he's just explaining the history of him with Zim to the audience, that's something I will say that's fantastic too about this movie. The fact that you don't have to have been a fan of the series or have watched it at all to just watch and enjoy this movie. You don't need any backstory at all with that, any context. So that's really well done. I really love Invader ZIM. I love Jhonen Vasquez's worlds that he created with these characters. As I said, when I discussed Invader ZIM almost a year ago at this point, last October, I mentioned that this show is in my top 5 favorite Nicktoons. At this point now, it's like top 3 for me. I just love it so much. But, so, I love the animation style, as I said. It's absolutely beautiful. Such talented artists. I was blown away watching it. And with Dib, how he's just sitting in his chair, which that was in the comic, how he's waiting for Zim. And in the comic there is kind of a meta line where he says Zim has been gone for what feels like years, because the first issue of the comic, which is published by Oni Press, It was published back in 2015, and that was the first Zim-related thing since the series was canceled back in 2002. So then, with this movie now, by the way, the whole reason this movie exists, in fact, is because Jhonen and Jenny Goldberg, they had been working on a series for Disney, in fact. It would have been called Very Important House, and they worked on it for several years developing it, and then sadly, it wasn't picked up to series, so then Disney just shelved it. And then, throughout the past several years, Jhonen has said that Nickelodeon was interested in new Zim, a new series or a new special, and Jhonen was always kind of hesitant. So then, what helped him decide to do this movie was that after that experience with Very Important House sadly not getting picked up, then he was just eager to do more Zim, since they were eager to, just having the support from Nickelodeon to do more Zim. And he apparently considered doing a miniseries, but this movie was just perfect. So that was the better choice. Just everything about it. The voice acting, too. I was just so excited to hear the voice actors in their roles again. Richard Horvitz plays Zim, Ricky Simons plays Gur, Melissa Fahn plays Gaz, and Andy Berman plays my favorite character, Dib. And this movie confirms certain things that I didn't necessarily realize about the show. First off, that their last name is in fact Membrane. I always thought Professor Membrane, that was kind of like his character on his TV show. That's vaguely mentioned only in one episode of Invader ZIM, in that episode, Battle Dib. But also, he says that he's 12 years old, which his age wasn't ever mentioned in the show either. It really doesn't matter, but... So he's 12, so I figure Gaz is probably around 10 or so. And I like Gaz's new outfit. I love also Gaz wearing her Gazmat suit going up to Dib's room. And he's been in there so long that he's just this gross blob now. And as I recall in the comic, though, he was actually much more grotesque. He had acne all over his face. He was just really, really gross. So they toned it down a bit for this. He's just kind of like this blob fused to his chair, and I absolutely loved the whole exchange where we finally see Zim when first Gaz is like, oh, for all you know, Zim could be gone. It's like, oh wait, there he is. You see Zim stretching with Gur, and then Dib saying how no one does all those stretches unless they're stretching for evil when he goes to Zim. Oh my gosh, that whole scene, I loved it so much. I mentioned when I discussed the series that my favorite dynamic with all these characters, my favorite dynamic is between Zim and Dib. And then probably also after that, I would say Zim and Gur. I love that dynamic. And then probably I would say Dib and Gaz, particularly in this movie. But even in the show too. But oh my gosh, just Zim. Oh my god, I was just so excited. And then when he's like, oh, move it along, hideous goblin. I'm posing dramatically for the Dib. I am Dib. And then when he started doing his I just was smiling like an idiot. I just love that. His classic Zim noises. And then he's like, oh, give me a second. I've been expecting you, Dib. So gloriously over the top. And I loved that shot of Zim. Oh my gosh, it was fantastic. And then when he's saying how his plan, phase one of his plan was to make Dib all smelly and useless. And then you see him, when he came up with his plan, he's just laughing maniacally in the toilet. And he's lifting the lid up and down. Oh my god, I loved it so much. That maniacal laugh, it was just fantastic. Richard Horvitz, especially, he really killed it in this movie. You could tell he probably was just waiting all these years with his Zim sounds, just wanting to do it again. Oh my gosh. I love how the show makes me so giddy. I don't know what it is about the show. I love how they're always just so over the top and dramatic over the dumbest of things, Zim in particular. But I also love when he's like, phase 2! And oh my god, and you just see phase 2 and just that. That shot too was amazing. It was just incredible. Wow. That whole scene. He's just doing a lot of dumb stuff, and then even Minnie Moose. Love Minnie Moose. Minnie Moose has been there the whole time, as we know, in the series. But when Minnie Moose, and we see Poochie, and Poochie saying how, oh, my mom loves pizza, and then Minnie Moose is just blasting it with its eyes. And it's just great about Zim, how he just has this plan, but then he can't remember phase 2 of his plan. because he's so incredible and amazing. Loved seeing also the neighbors, like, oh, Martha, the neighbor kid's an alien. Oh, false alarm. This is disguise. And the part where Zim calls the tallest, so excited to report to his Almighty Tallest Red, voiced by Wally Wingert, and Almighty Tallest Purple, voiced by Kevin McDonald. And those two just snacking, and then you saw that servant Irkin again from Hobo 13. I can't recall his name, but then when Almighty Tallest Purple is just spitting his soda at him, and Zim's excited because he thinks that they're going to visit when they're just like, oh, hey, remember Invader Zim? Oh yeah, we hate him. Oh, God. It's like, no, not Invader Jim, the one that gave him the donuts. Oh my goodness. And something I forgot to mention when I discussed Invader Zim the series, that I'm glad it came up in the movie because it reminded me, is that I always loved when Gur always called out Zim for being wrong, and in the movie when Zim thinks he puts the tallest on hold, and then he's like, oh, computer, did you put the tallest on hold? No. I love Zim's computer too, voiced by Jhonen. And anyway, so then afterward, when Zim is trying to remember phase 2 of his plan, and he asks the computer to play back any audio and video he has of it, and when the only time he says, like, oh no, I'll remember phase 2, we don't need to record anything. But then afterwards, when he says all that, and Almighty Tallists are saying he knows, doesn't he know we can see and hear him? But then when he asked the computer if he put them on hold, and he said no, and then he blasts them with his, and he got an upgrade a bit, Zim, with his spider legs. But then when Zim says, I don't think they heard anything, and Gur says, yes, they did. Like, once in a while, Gur has those moments where he actually knows what's going on, and he just calls him out, like, no, you're flat out wrong. That's great. And that reminds me, too, speaking of Zim with his upgraded spider legs, the part with Zim and Dib in the chair, and when Zim's just standing there, at one point I thought to myself, Zim looks a little taller. Like, the character looks a bit more fleshed out. I really loved, as I said, this new upgraded art style. Props to Jenny Goldberg, the art director. And then there's that whole great montage where Zim is trying to remember phase 2, and then there's just the montage of Gur having all this random stuff. At one point, that leprechaun cat, just all random stuff. And then Dib, meanwhile, is getting back in shape. And that was in the comic, too, where Dib gets super in shape, like he's the Hulk, and then he gets back to normal, and he says how I was out of shape, then I got too in shape, now I'm regular shape again. And you see Gaz with her electric guitar, like, pumping him up, getting him motivated. Liked seeing that support from her. That was cute. And then Dib ready to defeat Zim again. But I also love the part when he's talking to his dad, Professor Membrane, voiced by Roger Bumpus. And I liked the moment of genuine emotion where he says, I wish just once you'd have my back. And Professor Membrane says, wishing isn't very scientific, son. And then it was interesting, too, that Zim realizes in this movie that the tallest aren't planning on coming to Earth at all. And this also confirms, too, by the way, because in this movie, Earth is spelled U-R-T-H, so it confirms, which something Jhonen has always said, that this Earth isn't our Earth, it's just a bizarre version of Earth. But just when he asks the computer, and zooming out, and at one point when the computer says, oh, as you wish, sir, are you doing an accent? I get bored. But it's just hilarious, too, that the Irken Armada is just going in a straight line. So it's nowhere near Earth. And I also mentioned when I discussed this show, and I mentioned how excited I was for this movie, that the one thing I wanted to see, was looking forward to seeing, like if there's anything I wanted to have seen, was new sides to the characters. And we definitely got a lot of that. Even with Zim, when he's all depressed in his cheese cocoon of misery, and then when Dib walks in, and I love the part where Gur says, intruder, prepare to come on in. I just burst out laughing with that. That was so hilarious. But it's interesting that with Zim, his main motivation is that he wants to please his leaders the tallest. He wants to impress them. He wants to prove that he is this great invader, even though his mission, as we know, is a lie. He always thought that this was the most important mission, that he was the most important invader. So it's interesting seeing this side to him, that he's so depressed and miserable because he realizes that it's all a sham, and he only realizes that because the tallest are just going in a straight line and have no plans to come to Earth. So it took him this long to realize, but there you go. But I loved that whole scene. I just found it really interesting. Not like seeing Zim sad, but just that we saw this new side to Zim because he's always so confident and sure of himself. Just seeing this other, again, over-the-top emotion from him, just now super depressed. And I liked the part, too, where he just, falls out of the cheese cocoon and he just rolls to Dib. I liked that part for some reason. And Dib with the handcuffs. And then when he takes off the friendship bracelet that his dad made for Peace Day, these new bracelets. So then that's just that moment where Zim is looking at the bracelet and that's going to come into play somehow. And then at the keynote when Zim is still all depressed, but then when he takes over the bracelets with his Irkin technology, with that weird, whatever that little globby monster thing was. But before that, when Professor Membrane saying how he's so excited for Peace Day, no one else could be this excited, and then someone says, I'm excited, not scientifically possible, no one else could be as excited as him. But I also loved Zim that when he takes over with the bracelets, with his Irkin technology, and then Dib realizes that Zim tricked him. And then you see Zim walk out in his bizarre Professor Zim human costume, which is reminiscent of that stupid, ridiculous costume in The Girl Who Cried Gnome. So even a rare moment of Zim succeeding in his evil plan that he just came up with now to once and for all take over the Earth. And then when Dib wakes up and he thinks, oh, maybe it was all just a dream, but then we meet Clone Membrane, who thinks he's their dad. And it was just Zim's creation that he was going to try to do before when he was miserable and he was saying how, oh, but I couldn't get it to make pudding the way you like. And then I also loved the part where Dib looks out and then Zim is there as all the kids are putting on the bracelets and they're going to start joining hands. And then when they're going back and forth, you won't get away with this. What? You won't get away. What? Back and forth. And that was so hilarious too. And that was reminiscent of the episode Mortos the Soul Stealer, when Dib and Zim are just standing on either side of the road, one side of the sidewalk and then on the other side of the sidewalk, and then Dib's just saying Zim and then what? Just back and forth. And a funny thing about that is that there were supposed to be cars driving past, but then that wasn't animated, so then it was just an empty street. So then it's just funny that they're just shouting at each other back and forth just across this empty street in that episode. But that was so hilarious too. Also when Gaz says, Dib, look how big your head is on TV, and he's just like this inflated head. Gotta have a head joke thrown in there. Even though, ironically, in this movie, his head is smaller compared to in the series. And also it's funny because all the characters have big heads. They're just designs like that. They have big heads, small bodies, big eyes. So. But, classic running gag. You had to have that in there. And then when Zim asks Gur to create a song that will really motivate everyone, and the second I heard it, I thought, oh, this is going to usurp the Doom song. The Doom song from the first episode, The Nightmare Begins. That song was so wonderfully stupid. I absolutely loved it. Oh my gosh. And just him singing, peace is nice. It was just great. Peace is better than chicken and rice. Peace, 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 nice, nice, nice. Beautiful, beautiful. And as he's singing that song, I really liked the shot of when the girl and they're all holding hands, the kids, the chain of kids, and you see that girl jump over that volcano, and you just see the string of kids, and then she grabs the other kid's hand on the other side of the volcano. I really liked that shot. But that was some beautiful animation too, that alone. Just all of the over-the-top facial expressions too were fantastic. all of the over-the-top screaming, as we know and love from the series too, particularly with Zim, but there was a lot of it with Dib too in this. It was fantastic. And so I watched this movie. This was my second time watching it now, and then there were certain things that I hadn't even noticed the first time, and then watching it again now, it was great. Like with that cat thing or whatever it was scratching at the kids, and then afterward then you see it getting arrested, that cat, like for antagonizing the kids, I guess. That was so stupid. Oh my gosh. But then with that Clembrain guy, and then there's pudding everywhere, and then Dib saying it's been 10 years, Gaz, and she says it's been 2 days. But then when she says, it's not like we can just walk out the front door, and then just engorged with pudding, doody-doody-doo. That was so hilarious to me too. And then when he just walks out the front door, and then she's like, well, okay, it's not like we can just walk out the front door. Oh, and then, see, all the random humor in this show, I could see why certain people wouldn't like that, but I just find it hilarious. It's just so great. But I love the part where she pulls out that ham, and then it just there's a freeze frame, and you hear some narrator guy saying, now pay close attention to that ham, because it's not the last time you're going to see that ham in the story. And I thought to myself, oh wow, that's not going to come into play. I can't wait to see that payoff. Oh my gosh. And then, as I said, I loved Dib and Gaz working together, and then Gaz reasoning with Tak's ship. That may have been the only thing that you would have needed context on. You probably would have thought, if you hadn't seen the show, just like, who's Tak? But Dib explains it though, like when he says like Tak's ship, Zim's enemy, whatever. So even that was clever too, that quick context for that. If you hadn't seen the show before, hadn't seen that, that's one of my favorite episodes, Tak the Hideous New Girl. But anyway, with Tak's ship and Gaz reasoning with it, saying you hate Dib but you hate Zim more, so then the ship helps them they have to fly to Mu Ping 10, where Professor Membrane is being held in prison, and they have to outsmart Clembrain, so then he's just out there with his pudding. And I love too when Gaz had said, it's the worst pudding I've ever had in my life, but when he's just like slapping the pudding down on the grill, he's like, oh, this is great, family time, whatever. And Clembrain, by the way, is voiced by Jhonen too. I didn't even realize that until the credits. I was like, oh, Jhonen? Great voice acting. I loved it. Oh my gosh. But I liked also that shot when Dib says about that pudding, he just like flips it over. That shot too was just great. All the absolutely phenomenal animation. I loved it. But then with Zim and how his plan's actually working, and then everyone's running around, he's saying, oh, look how everyone loves me and looking at me, and then again Gur calling him out, nobody's even looking at you, like when he thinks like, oh, they're running in terror just seeing Zim. But then the whole thing with his stupid chair, it's like the peanuts and the flame, oh, try the peanut button. With his flames, his chair, oh my goodness. Because he's so excited waiting for the tallest to finally call. And when Zim says, terrible work on the signs, Gur, worse than I expected. Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. I think Gur genuinely thinks that that's a compliment. I don't think he's like, oh, Gur. And then the tallest are just upset, though, that they want to just keep going in their straight line, because the whole thing with Zim having all the kids join hands and then using his great creation mini moose to pull the earth into the path of the Irken ship. So that's fantastic too, his glorious mini moose. I love that mini moose is both the key to destroying and saving the world. Glorious. But then when Almighty Tailless Red says, why steer around the earth when we can just blow it up? Like, there you go. And I liked also when Dib and Gaz were just singing in the ship, like whatever stupid song they were singing, and then that was cute too. And then Tak's ship just cuts them off. Tak's ship voiced by Olivia Dabo, who voices Tak. And then they're like, hey! And she says, your voices are bad. So then they go save Professor Membrane, and then they just end up in prison. And this was one of my favorite moments as well, when Dib is feeling so defeated and he's crying on the floor, and Gaz is saying, oh, normally you crying on the floor is hilarious, but then she says, you're my brother, man. I only torment you because I know you can handle it. I've done way worse than throw you into space prison. I absolutely loved that moment from Gaz, because in the series, there wasn't really any, as Jhonen himself has said when he discussed the show on the Nickelodeon Animation podcast a couple years ago. He said in that podcast that there were never any moments in the series where there were actual moments of warmth between the characters. So I liked in this movie how, again, there were new sides to the characters. There were those nice, genuine family moments between the Membrane family, between Dib and Professor Membrane, and, of course, Professor Membrane and Gaz and Dib. So I really liked that. I liked this moment a lot because it shows that Gaz knows all along that anytime she tortures him, that it's not enough to break him, and that she knows he's tough, and as she says, I know you can handle it. So she knows that her tormenting him and being mean to him and everything, it's not going to phase him, it's not going to get to him. And so basically it's her saying that she knows he's tough. So I just really liked the subtext of that moment too. I thought it was really sweet. I loved that a lot. Just showing that their family, she's got his back no matter what. So that was just really sweet. I really loved that moment a lot. And then when they reunite with Professor Membrane, he thinks this is all a hallucination, but it was cute when she was just in his arms and then Dib was hugging him. That was just so cute, like around the leg, and he was like patting his head. That was adorable too. And then when Tak's ship shows up again to rescue them, and she says, hang on to your disgusting butts, and then Dib just says, what's with you and butts? I always liked those moments too, even throughout the series, when Dib points out the ridiculous stuff, like, what's up with that? That's just so silly. Just reminds me of in Baloney's Maximus, when Zim turns Dib into baloney, and then I'm turning you into what you really are, or whatever he says, and then Dib says, deep down, what you really are, and then Dib says, deep down, I'm baloney? Yes, that's just dumb. I love that. It reminded me of that. And then it was just so funny too with like Professor Membrane with his tea the whole time, like, oh, this is so realistic, like he thinks it's all a hallucination. That was really funny too. And then when Gaz takes over the ship, like it's virtual reality, and like her eyes go wide, like it's a real life video game for her, like when Tak's ship is like, how about helping me out? And then she puts on the gloves and the virtual reality mask thing, and she throws away her Game Slave 4. So she's upgraded to Game Slave 4. In the series she had Game Slave 2, so I guess we skipped over enough time from Game Slave 3 just right to Game Slave 4. And I also absolutely loved the moment when Dib says, hang on, Dad, I'll save you, then you'll be proud of me. And then Professor Membrane says, son, you don't have to prove anything. I'm always proud of you. That was so sweet too, because Dib always feeling alone that no one ever believes him about Zim, or in Gaz's case, she doesn't care that Zim is an alien trying to take over Earth. But then his eyes just kind of widen, like he just genuinely didn't know that his dad's proud of him. That was just I really loved that moment too. I loved those genuine, pure, sweet moments between the Membrane family. I really loved that. And then, of course, juxtaposed with Zim and his ridiculousness, I liked also just another little thing I noticed this second time watching, Gur holding Minnie Moose on a string like Minnie Moose is a balloon. Oh my gosh. And then when they crash back to Earth, trying to prevent Earth from going into the Florpus, which the Florpus, it turns out, is just a tear in the universe that will just lead to alternate dimensions. And Zim just winging it like, probably that was my plan all along. But then when Dib crashes, and then they need Minnie Moose, because when Professor Membrane's saying, hypothetically, if you had a purple robotic moose to just save the Earth, and then when Dib, being all intimidating, says, give me the moose, and like Zim's like genuinely scared for a second there. I found that interesting too. And then when he just is running, and then I always love the banter with them when Zim says, you're ugly when you lie, Dib. I'm not lying. Then why are you ugly? Oh my god, that was so funny. I liked also the little part, which this was apparently added later on in production, but it was so stupid and funny, when these little alien creatures are having a little birthday party, happy Blorf Day Gloinky, their little Earth, like that little planet, and then when Zim and Dib are just running over it, and it's just like they're like it's a tornado for them or something. And also that randomly reminded me earlier in the movie when Gurr turned on the TV and he's watching that show, Floopsy Bloops Schmoopsy, whatever, that dumb show. And that was a reference to one of the comics that Jhonen wrote. And in that issue, it was Zim and Gurr just watching TV and just watching the show, like hours and hours of it while all this other stuff is going on, just like getting sucked into that stupid show. So that was funny seeing that too. I also liked the line when, it felt so meta, it had to be, when Zim said, "Gurr, all this evil is doing a number on my throat. Fetch me a soothing lozenge." Always his stretched out dialogue. I loved that so much. Even earlier when he was talking to Dib and when he's saying, "Do not," into whatever he said, I can't remember now, but oh my god. In that scene when Dib was still a chair. And speaking of, I also liked when they were running, and then when Zim says, "I liked you better when you were a chair," and Dib says, "I liked you better when you were a toilet." And then, of course, to get Minnie Moose, when Gaz is screaming at Dib, "Dib, you still have that ham I gave you?" And he's like, "Of course!" And he takes out the ham, and then the narrator, "See, there's that ham again." And then it's just so over the top again with Gaz holding up the ham, and you see the lightning bolts, and then she just throws it at Zim. Like, that's all you need to do. Oh my goodness. And then it's just so funny when Professor Membrane is just rearranging Minnie Moose like it's a Rubik's Cube, and then as they're entering the Florpus, and then all the different animation styles, those were all really cool too, and how they're just like screaming as all this is going on. It was so funny. Oh my god, so amazing. And then finally when he just solves Minnie Moose, and then you just see, "Save world, yes, no." Oh my gosh. And then when everything is seemingly resolved, and then Fudio is back, and then Clembrine is just there too, and then Dib just says, "So does he live here now, or what?" And Gaz just shrugs, like, "I don't know." And this also confirms another thing when Fudio says, "Thank you, Gazleen." I always thought that was just an internet rumor thing, that Gaz's full name is actually Gasoline, but this confirmed it, so I found that interesting as well. And then when Zim is just there again, and he says, "What if I told you my plan all along was to steal this, whatever it is," like their weird lawn ornament thing. Phase 2 was Phase 2 all along. And when he's standing on Gurr's eyes, I liked that shot too. And first seeing that, I thought to myself, "Ow," like, but then I remembered, oh wait, but Gurr's a robot, like, duh. And so he's fine, that's not gonna hurt him. But then also I loved at the very end when Gurr, which again, this was reminiscent of the show, this would happen often in the show, when in this movie, when Gurr's saying, "Did we win? Did we win? Did we win? Did we win?" over and over, and all these different inflections. That would be once in a while in the show as well, because they would do different multiple takes, and then Jhonen would just use all of them on a loop, so he just says it like at least 10 times. That's just so funny. And then when Zim calls the tallest and they're just screaming, oh my gosh. And then that pug just crashes down on Zim. That pug that Gurr had launched earlier in the movie, and then Gurr is saying, "Yay, I missed you so much!" And he just launches it again, eats it and launches it back up again. So, oh my god, such a funny, hilarious, visually stunning movie. I absolutely loved it, start to finish. I was just in such joy. I just love these characters so much, love this world. It's just so crazy and fantastic. Oh my gosh. And then at the end, when the credits were rolling, I just sat there applauding. And actually, there was a fan screening on the West Coast when this movie was released on Netflix on August 16th. And apparently it sold out within minutes, and I'm over here on the East Coast, so I will say I'm jealous of all those people who got to be in the audience watching the movie. Just, I'm sure it was just, must have been so much fun just watching with a big group. And then they did a little Q&A afterward with Jhonen, Jenny Goldberg, Ricky, I believe Kevin Manthe also, and then perhaps a few other people, and then also Richard was on Skype, and Melissa Fahn. And so I envy all those people. But, you know, watching it alone in the dark, which is what I did, that was just as good. So I just really love Invader ZIM. I'm hoping, At some point, maybe another special, maybe another season down the line, I would love to see more. But for now, there are the comics. They're released once a month. But just props to Jhonen, props to Jenny Goldberg, props to all the storyboard artists, absolutely amazing work. Props to the voice actors, incredible. And I will say, if anyone who worked on this movie is listening to this, on behalf of all of the fans, we truly appreciate all of the hard work you put into it. It absolutely shows. It was such an amazing movie. So, all that being said, this feels so anticlimactic now, but I do have another Invader ZIM story to share. I say another because this is my second one now. I first shared one when I discussed Invader ZIM, the series. That one was called Dodgeball of Doom. This one is called Sitting in a Tree. So, here we go. Without further ado, it's story time. The blazing sunshine fueled Zim's rising frustrations as he strolled through the park with Gurr trailing behind. He swiped at a bee incessantly buzzing near his head, pausing to glance around and take in the sights of children partaking in outdoor merriment. Their squeals of laughter and joy sickened him to an unbearable degree, and with his patience all but gone, he tugged on Gurr's dog leash. "Let's go, Gurr! I can't stand to watch these small human stink beasts a moment longer. They nauseate me. We'll simply have to inflict our reign of doom upon these pathetic beings another day. Gurr?" He turned to find his disguised robot plucking some colorful little plants from the ground. His eyes bulged, and he rushed over and knocked them out of Gurr's hands. "Gurr, what do you think you're doing? You can't go around pulling things out of Earth's soil. They could be infected with poison or dirt. We can't have any human contaminants infiltrating our superior systems." Gurr scooped the plants back up, bringing them to his face. "But I like flowers. They're pretty." "Flowers?" Zim said, cocking his head. "They smell real good," Gurr said, and he shoved them in Zim's face. "See?" Zim screamed and flailed his arms in a panic as he tried to ward off the flowers Gurr insisted on thrusting in his face. Finally, he ripped them out of Gurr's hands. "Have you completely lost your feeble mind?" he said, chucking them to the ground. "Get this through your malfunctioning comprehending chip, Gurr. Flowers are bad. Anything that grows from the earth is bad. Now let's get out of here before you cause me any more mental pain." He yanked on Gurr's leash. The robot fell forward, leaving Zim to drag him out of the park, but not before Gurr secretly swiped up the flowers again, cradling them to his chest as he closed his eyes and inhaled. Zim's intense loathing only deepened as he reflected on the day's trivialities, while muttering angrily to himself the entire way home. When Dib's house came into view, his anger flared, and he clenched the leash so hard it could snap. Dib. That big-headed, infuriating earth-smelly. I wonder what he's planning to do next to try and thwart my mission to enslave the human race. I'll bet he's... Gurr? Gurr had leapt up from the ground and now ambled up to the front door, where he dropped the sloppily thrown-together bouquet of flowers. He walked back, pleased with himself, while Zim grabbed him by the top of his head. "Gurr, why did you leave those terrifying plant thingies on the Dib's doorstep?" "Ow," Gurr said with a shrug. "Think hard, Gurr. Use that faulty robot brain of yours and think." A few seconds went by in which Gurr simply stared up at Zim with his big, round, clueless eyes, and Zim stared back at him with his patience draining more and more by the second. "Well," Zim said, on the verge of snapping altogether. Gurr's glazed look suddenly came to life as he pointed and screamed, "Squirrel!" He took off after the furry little rodent, which had scurried down the sidewalk with an acorn in its mouth. "Gurr!" Zim said, chasing after his disobedient sidekick. "Gurr, get back here!" After they'd run off, the door to the Membrane house opened, and Professor Membrane peered out. He looked down to find the flowers laying there, and he picked them up, scratching his head. A scrap of paper tacked onto the flower stems read "Gaz" in scraggly letters. Shutting the door, he turned to his kids, both of whom sat on the couch. Dib stared at the TV, engrossed in the latest episode of Mysterious Mysteries, while Gaz played her game Slave 2. "Daughter, it appears you have a secret admirer." An electric current of shock and horror rippled through both Gaz and Dib. The former snapped her head up and dropped her gaming device, while Dib fell right off the couch. You must have left quite an impression on some young child who's still naive enough to succumb to such passing feelings of blind adoration, Professor Membrate said as he handed the flowers to Gaz, who snatched them from his grasp and eyed them in steely suspicion. A little word of fatherly advice: if you plan on tearing the limbs off of whoever sent you these flowers, try to do so without crushing the person's fragile feelings beyond repair. With that, he walked off, shaking his head to himself as he laughed warmly. Ah, young love. Gaz clutched the flowers, holding them at arm's length, while her brother got up and paced the room. This has got to be some kind of trick, Dib said. But by who? And what's their ulterior motive? I mean, let's face it, nobody in their right mind would actually give you flowers. Are you saying there's no possibility I could actually have a secret admirer? Gaz asked. Well, there's got to be some sort of logical explanation as to why anyone would be foolish enough to give you, of all people, a bouquet of... Unbeknownst to Dib, he'd invoked the wrath of his younger sister, and he found that out the hard way when she smacked him over the head with the flowers, exploding petals everywhere. She grabbed a fistful of his shirt, grinding her teeth. I'm only going to say this once. Stay out of my business, or I'll remove your head and feed it to a pig. She shoved him away and stormed out, while Dib simply stared after her, not quite shaken by her threat. His gaze dropped to the crumpled-up flowers on the floor, and he narrowed his eyes. I'll get to the bottom of this. Zim pressed himself against the front door of his base, wheezing, his stick-like legs struggling to hold himself up. Gur had since taken off his dog costume and now giggled insanely as he pranced about the living room. You're acting more peculiar than usual, Gur. Clearly you're long overdue for a software upgrade. Abruptly, Gur halted, and his head panel popped open. He took out a piece of paper and thrust it at Zim. Look at what I drew! He waved the paper around in Zim's face until the alien boiled with fury and ripped it out of his hands. Zim gazed down at the scratchy crayon drawing and felt his antenna twitch upon recognizing the purple-haired female in the picture. This is a drawing of you eating pizza with the Dib sister? Gur, what is the meaning of this? Gur's tongue poked out of his mouth as he stood there with a blank expression without saying a word. Zim narrowed an eye at him, leaning in closer. Those flowers, did you leave them for Dib's scary female sibling? Gur's countenance changed at last as he smiled a sickly sweet grin and gave a nod. Zim blinked, slowly straightening his posture. So you've grown fond of the Dib sibling, have you? He tapped one of his claw-like fingers to his face as he pondered the notion. This is quite an interesting development. Dib has already repressed our mission far too many times, and his sister is one intimidating adversary. Perhaps if you were to spend some time with her, you could get her to disclose Dib's weaknesses to you, and we could use them to destroy him once and for all, so that I could finally conquer the Earth without the Dib squandering my brilliantly evil plans. Yes, I'm ingenious! Laugh with me, Gur! Zim let out a grandiose laugh of sheer madness. Gur watched in silence for a moment before he too erupted into a fit of maniacal laughter. Dib and Gaz sat alone at their usual lunch table when Zim marched up behind them. Dib paused in his chewing, as if sensing the incoming disturbance to their thus far uneventful lunch. And finally he turned around. Zim, he said, clenching his spork, what are you doing here? Zim brought up a fist and cleared his throat. I've come to engage in a friendly, perfectly normal, and definitely non-scheming conversation with your little sister. Gaz froze for a second, cracking one eye open at Zim, before shutting it again, returning to her game as she calmly said, I have a name, you know. Right, Gus. Gaz. Yes, of course, Zim said. So, Gaz, I'd like to propose what I'm certain will be an amazing opportunity for you. One that is in fact so amazing you won't be able to resist it. You're boring me, Gaz said, idly pressing buttons on her handheld game. Get to the point already. Well, Zim rubbed the back of his head. What if I were to tell you that someone would be interested in taking you out on, what do we humans call it? Oh yes, a date. Dib's utensil clattered to the floor. Even the typically stoic Gaz couldn't mask her surprise as her amber eyes flew wide open. The two siblings sat, frozen, their mouths ajar. A second later, Dib lurched forward, grabbing Zim with both hands by the tiny pink collar of his Erkin uniform. You gave Gaz those flowers, didn't you? Zim laughed in Dib's face. You dumb, silly earth creature. You think Zim would ever fall prey to such sickening rituals associated with human affection? I am above such horrible afflictions. Well, if you didn't send her the flowers then— Do not interrupt me, Zim interrupted. The heinous flowers you speak of were from my loyal servant Gur. Wait a minute, Dib said, releasing Zim and taking a step back. Are you saying your weird robot dog thingy has a crush on my sister? It sadly would appear that way, yes, Zim said. And it would most please my precious little Gur if your sister would accompany him on a date tonight. Oh, wow, Dib said, throwing his hands in the air. I've always known you were crazy, Zim, but this is taking it to a whole new level. If you think my sister would actually agree to go on a date with your insane robot, you must be— I'll go. See, she'll— What? Dib said. I'll go on the stupid date with Zim's stupid robot, Gaz said. Gaz, do you hear yourself? You can't possibly want to go on a date with Gaz's hand shot out and twisted into Dib's shirt once more. She leaned in dangerously close to him. I told you to stay out of my business. I can make my own decisions, and I'm going on this date whether you like it or not. She let go of him and walked right up to Zim, who flinched but otherwise remained rooted in place as she pointed a sharpened digit at him. Tell your dumb robot there'd better be no funny business, or I'll deactivate him and throw his remains into a river. Got it? Zim's breathing came out in shallow spurts, his contact-coated eyes wide and shining with unbridled terror. He'd barely nodded before Gaz stalked off, leaving Zim with only a second to compose himself before Dib got in his face again. I don't know what you're up to, Zim, but whatever it is, I'll find out, and I'll stop you like I always do. Zim couldn't help smirking at his ultimate nemesis. If you say so, Dib. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go help my faithful robot get ready for his date. He walked away while Dib stood there, trying to make sense of everything that had just transpired. Somehow, though, only one thought popped into his mind above all the rest. Wait, but we still have a few more hours left of school. Now remember, Gur, Zim said later that evening as he walked with Gur to the membrane household. The small robot looked like a mini magician, dressed in a black tuxedo and top hat for his chosen date attire. You charm the Earth female, earn her trust, and then you casually ask her about her dim-witted brother's weaknesses, which we shall use against him to finally take him down. I'll be keeping an eye on you all night using advanced spyware technology. He pulled out a pair of regular old binoculars. There's also the two-way communicator chip I've implanted into your head so that you'll be able to hear everything I say, and I'll be able to hear you as well. He chuckled. This plan truly is idiot-proof. I swear, sometimes even I impress me with my geniusness. They approached the house, inside which Dib prattled on to a fully disinterested Gaz. I mean, sure, we know Zim's robot is stupid, but the fact that he's also unpredictable is what we need to worry about, he said. At any given moment, he could try to do something crazy, like suck out your brains or something. Gaz said. That would be kind of cool. Gaz, this is serious. You have to be on high alert. Who knows what kind of evil mind control game Zim's crazy robot is planning on pulling tonight? The doorbell rang in rapid succession, and Gaz breezed past her brother as she reached for the door. You'd know crazy, Dib. She opened the door to find Gur repeatedly pressing the doorbell. He stopped when he saw her, and he threw himself around her. We's going out! Gaz cringed as Gur tightened his hold on her, crushing her organs. She managed to wrangle herself free and pry him off. I already regret this, she said, yet she followed him out the door anyway. The smells of greasy fried dough and salted popcorn, coupled with the sounds of whirring mechanical rides and overly excited children, all pointed to one dreadful destination, a carnival. A pink-haired teenager sat behind the ticket counter, resting her chin in her palm as she lazily flipped through a magazine. She blew a bubble from a large wad of electric blue gum. Give me 20 million tickets! The bubble popped. Her eyes scanned the well-dressed little robot up and down, before she cast an inquisitive glance at the angry-looking girl standing beside him, and finally at the loose coins and wrinkly dollar bill he'd slapped down on the counter. She counted up the money and scoffed. This isn't even enough for one ticket. Oh, Gur said, and he pulled out more cash, adding it to the pile. How about now? The aloof teenager blinked. She scraped her manicured hand along the counter and took out a string of tickets, handing them to Gur. He eagerly snatched them up and waved them around like a paper ribbon. Yay, I'm gonna eat till I puke, he said, grabbing Gaz by the hand and yanking her into the carnival festivities before she could protest. Outside the perimeter of the venue stood a tall, mighty tree with twisting branches. Zim sat perched atop one of its branches, leaning against the heavy bark. He chuckled viciously to himself as he watched the two of them through his binoculars. Yes, enjoy yourself now, you dumb little human, for soon you will unknowingly help Zim by providing the information needed to take down your pathetic excuse for a planet once and for all. Zim's evil laughter cut short when the sound of rustling leaves caught his attention. He lowered the binoculars and stared with narrowed eyes at the dark green leaves, waiting to hear the sound again, but nothing came. Finally, he raised the binoculars and focused back on his cohort. Gur dragged Gaz through the crowd of disgusting carnival-goers, stuffing their faces with churros and cotton candy. She would have pummeled the next unfortunate person who happens to cross her path, had Gur not stepped onto a platform for the bumper cars. His arm vibrated when suddenly he shot up and out of Gaz's grasp. His top hat flew off his head, and he stuck sideways to the magnetic ceiling connecting the bumper car cables, which zipped by undisturbed. Gur giggled, waving at Gaz, while Zim's eyes shot open wide. "No, Gur, get down from there! You can't draw attention to yourself lest these dreadful humans catch on to our amazing plan." Gaz walked up to a portly worker manning the controls for the bumper cars. "Hey, there's a kid stuck to the ceiling." The worker drew himself out of his eternal state of misery long enough to glance up and see Gur hanging from the ceiling, swinging his legs back and forth while humming a jaunty little tune to himself. He let out a tired sigh. Not again. He pressed a large red button, stopping the flow of electricity, and Gur came crashing to the ground. Gaz walked over and grabbed him by one of his robotic limbs, hauling the oblivious little robot out of harm's way just before two bumper cars collided into each other. Zim blinked behind the binoculars, dumbfounded. The Earth female rescued Gur? "Look," Gaz said, releasing Gur, "you're really stupid, and I don't feel like chasing you around and getting you out of trouble all night. Let's just go play one of those dumb carnival games, okay?" "Will you win me a monkey?" Gaz scoffed. "I hate monkeys." Piggies, on the other hand. "Ooh, pigs taste like bacon!" "Yeah, they do," Gaz said. She and Gur headed over to one of the game booths, behind which a gangly teen with shaggy blonde hair sat, half asleep. He jolted awake when Gur slammed some money down. "I want to win a pig!" The blonde teenager stared for a moment, brows knitting together. "Hey, why's that metal kid wearing a tuxedo?" "Why's your face so hideous to look at?" Gaz asked. The teen now lowered his brows, though he said nothing, as if knowing he had no argument. He took the money and handed Gur 3 rings to toss at the glass bottles lined up against the wall behind him. Gur wasted no time in throwing all 3 of them at the same time. They ricocheted off the wall, spiraling in different directions. One knocked a little kid's ice cream clean off the cone. The second hit a random guy, who screamed and fell backwards, knocking over people behind him and sending them tumbling down like a row of collapsing dominoes. The third struck a lever for the Ferris wheel, sending the ride into overdrive. It spun uncontrollably, and people flew out every which way. They hurtled through the air screaming and crashed into various booths and rides. The worker operating the Ferris wheel finally pulled the lever back, returning the ride to its normal speed, all without looking up from his newspaper. People dragged themselves free from the rubble of broken wood and charred metal, groaning in pain. Gaz said as she stared at the destruction. "That was pretty funny. Let me try." She took out some money and threw it at the blonde teen, who simply stood there, stunned by the sights before him. From behind his binoculars, Zim hummed to himself, riveted too by the unfurling chaos. "The horrifying little dirt child finds amusement in human turmoil," he said with an unexpected spark of intrigue. Gaz tossed all 3 rings one after the next, and each one landed around the neck of a glass bottle. "Yay, picky time!" Gur said in sheer happiness. The blonde behind the booth still didn't move, his eyes wide and stupid, so Gaz took it upon herself to claim her prize by snatching one of the stuffed piggies hanging above them. She handed it to Gur, who squeezed it so tightly its eyes nearly popped out. "All this talk of pigs is making me hungry," she said. "Let's go stuff our faces." She walked off with an excitable Gur, and together the two of them ordered every item off the menu from one of the food vendors. They sat down and proceeded to enjoy a bountiful meal of hot dogs, burgers, and weenies on a stick. The longer they sat there eating, without saying a word, the more Zim's patience dwindled. "Okay, Gur, you've enjoyed yourself long enough. Ask about Dib's weaknesses already so that we may suck the life out of his impetuous soul. Aha, Dib said, popping out from one of the branches. Zim's crimson eyes bulged for a second, though upon seeing his enemy, a fiery rage swept through him. Dib. I knew you and your idiot robot were up to something, Dib said, pausing to pull a few loose twigs out of his hair. He slid down the bark of the tree and landed on the same branch as Zim. Fortunately, I had the foresight to follow you here and spy on you as you spied on my sister. I had to see for myself what exactly your evil plan was. Which I gotta say, even for you, this one's really stupid. Zim's entire body shook with anger. I will end you! He launched himself at Dib, and as the two engaged in a wrestling of limbs, Gaz looked up, swallowing the piece of corn dog she'd been chewing. Hey, she said, turning to Gur, who slurped down his fifth soda. Did you hear the sickening sounds of my brothers and your stupid master's voices just now? Gur nodded, releasing the straw from his mouth. Yeah, my master's been here the whole time. He put a communicator thing in my head to find out your brother's secrets. He thinks you're real scary. Of course, through the two-way communicator, Zim and Dib had heard him as well, and the two of them froze now. Wait, Dib said, pulling back from Zim. You're scared of my sister? Nonsense! I find her an inferior and worthless human like the rest of your pitiful species, and grrr! You're supposed to find out the Dib secrets, not expose Zim's. Follow through on your mission or I'll blow up the TV. Give me the communicator, Gaz said, and Gur promptly took out the chip from inside his head and surrendered it to her. She looked at it for a second before crushing it in her palm, letting the pieces crumble to the ground as she unclenched her fist, all while taking another bite out of her corn dog. Gur, can you hear me? Gur, obey Zim! No answer came, and Dib's snickering soon broke the silence. Oh man, I can't believe I never realized it before. Who would have thought a supposedly horrible alien who wants to wipe out the human race is terrified of my little... Gah! Zim chucked his binoculars at Dib, and with him momentarily vulnerable as he rubbed the bruise forming on his head, he went in to attack him once more. Now that those idiots aren't listening, Gaz said, I should probably tell you I didn't really want to come here tonight. Surprisingly, Gur paused in his ravenous eating. I only did it to get a rise out of my brother. He infuriates me in a way your idiotic brain couldn't even begin to understand. A gust of wind picked up, and Gur's forgotten top hat rolled near her feet. She picked it up and placed it back on his head. Obviously you didn't want to be here either, since your master clearly put you up to this, so no hard feelings, I guess. With nothing left to say, Gaz got up and headed for the exit. She walked past all the broken booths and the many paramedics who'd arrived. A tug on her shirt brought her to a stop, and she turned to find Gur standing there. He took out the messy picture he'd drawn of the two of them eating pizza and held it out to her. Just then, Zim and Dib fell out of the tree, crashing in front of them, though Gaz didn't even flinch. She took the drawing from Gur and stashed it away for safekeeping, while disheveled Dib bolted up. Gaz, there you are! Listen to me, Zim's trying to... Without missing a beat, she grabbed her brother by the scruff of his shirt and grit her teeth. You're lucky there are no pigs in the vicinity. Suddenly she turns to Zim, and the slightest hint of a frightening little smirk slid across her face. She threw up both hands. Boo! Zim screeched, throwing his hands over his head to shield himself from her ire, while Gaz let out a satisfied chuckle and walked off with Dib in tow. Gur clutched his stuffed piggy and slumped against Zim, who glanced down at his lovesick comrade for a moment before looking back at Gaz. You know, Gur, while tonight may have been a minor setback in our mission, I wouldn't deem it a complete failure. That little Earth child you're so fond of has the potential to be a worthy accomplice. Perhaps, once we finally eradicate the humans, we shall spare her life, for even I, the great Zim, must confess that while I still find humans to be mind-numbingly worthless, I'm beginning to see what you find so appealing about Gaz. Alright, that was Sitting in a Tree. And I will say I took a few more creative liberties with the characters. Like, I gave Zim some more emotion. I mean, because I don't know if we've ever really seen Zim genuinely embarrassed or nervous or anything like that, since he's always so sure of himself. And also I gave Gaz a bit more emotion. It's much more subtle, but it was there. And also I'm realizing, though, that I kind of made Gur maybe a little too aware of everything going on, because he always just has his random lines, but what are you gonna do? So, as I said, one more time, just have to say, I really love Invader ZIM, hoping for more, because I love these characters, and I love this bizarre, twisted version of Earth. I love the random humor. It's just so funny, but it's just so well done. And until there's more, I'll just say, again, thank you to everyone who worked on the movie. Loved it so much. And with that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at StorytellSaga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, if only I had a sack of potatoes, because I'll be discussing Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.